but before I share my screen, I kind of wanted to know who here, who I can see, has been to Flushing Meadows Corona Park. By show of hands, just a hand. Okay, a lot of you. Ooh, thumbs up, that also works. Okay, who has been to the Queen's Museum? Oh, wow. So many more than I thought. It's because you're probably all World's Fair experts. Okay, well, I have a lot of maps because it's kind of weird to give a tour on a building when you're not in it. So it'll help orient you even if you haven't been there. And the talk is meant for people who don't know anything about the 39 World's Fair. It's really just the highlights. It's a huge fair covered, was it 900 acres? So I'm really just gonna be talking about the highlights at the tip of the iceberg. So I'm gonna share my screen. Does that work? We're good? Okay.
Yes, it's full screen.
So pretty much what makes this fair so distinctive, it's historical context. So I'm going to give a very, very mini history lesson of what's going on at the time. So the fair was held with World War II kind of emerging in the background. So the Nazi Party had rapidly gained power in the 30s. In 1938, so the Nazi Party invaded and annexed Austria, then Czechoslovakia. 39, they invaded Poland, Great Britain, and then Great Britain and France entered the war. In June 1940, while the fair is underway, France fell. And when the fair started, it's interesting, Winston Churchill is such a monumental figure today. But
I'm having trouble with the video.
Sorry, if you can mute yourself, that'd be great. Okay. So when the fair started, people thought he was past his prime, but by the time the fair ended, he had kind of been catapulted to iconic status that we know now. And at this point, during the fair, the US wasn't involved in the war yet. American opinion was pretty much divided whether or not to get involved, but it's definitely this underlying fear and affected the fair in more subtle ways, such as, you know, Germany wasn't represented at the fair. They didn't have a pavilion or an exhibit. In the US itself, there's the Great Depression from 1929 to 39, which leads right up to the World's Fair. 15 million people were unemployed, half the country's banks failed. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal programs really helped work. They were really working by this point to get the country back to work. He started them in 33. And if anything, they're almost winding down by the time the fair started. And the fair, in some ways, was actually very much a part of this recovery effort. It was another initiative to help the economy. And it's at a moment when the US is in an upswing. It was a very important moment of hope and looking for a better standard of living. So why did the World's Fair of 39 and 40 happen? The short answer is money. The Chicago Exposition of 1933 to 34 turned a profit right in the middle of the Great Depression. And big business leaders and politicians in New York City thought, you know, New York City, it could do even better. To kind of attach a surface rationale behind having the fair, they said that it was to celebrate the 150th anniversary of George Washington's inauguration in New York City. And this is a commemorative coin you could get for World's Fair of him being sworn in. So they decided it was going to be in New York, but where would it be? The Corona Ash Dump in Queens, bit of a fixer-upper, but it was actually a perfect place to have a fair. It had good access to Manhattan. There was multiple ways to get to it. There was a new highway being built by the Parks Commissioner, Robert Moses. And I'm not going to talk about him too much, but hopefully you guys have an idea who he is. He was a Parks Commissioner at the time, plus a number of other positions. He was kind of coming into his own in his power in New York, but his lifelong dream was to convert this area into a park. So right next to his Grand Central Parkway, which he just had built. And he was promised money from the fair's profits in order to convert it to a park, but the fair didn't have a profit, so that didn't happen, but longer story. So the Corona ash dump in the early 1900s, there was plans to make the area into a deep water port, but it needed to harden up the ground. So to harden up the ground, which is really swampy, for 30 years, they made it into this dump. And this ash pile on the upper right, you can see this little man here for scale, was built up over 30 years. So construction for the fair began in 1936. This is the fair's president, Grover Wallen. He's breaking ground for construction. And the transformation of this dump into the fair was described as from dump to glory. And they even used this in publicity, that they had to move mountains, like they moved Corona Mountain. That was the first step. To stabilize the marshy ground, they had to drive about 758 miles of piling into the ground to stabilize it. Basically, piling, if you don't know what it is, it's these huge logs. And once we get to the Trilon and Perisphere, 1,000 logs exist underneath that to stabilize the ground, which is kind of crazy. So once they had level ground, they started to lay pipes and conduits, about 62 miles of roads. They brought in 10,000 trees as far away as Massachusetts and 2 million shrubs and bushes. Overall, the cost to complete the fair was about $155 million. So the fair officially opened April 30th, 1939. It was broadcast on television. It was the first time a presidential address was broadcast live on TV, and he did it from the Plaza of Governments, which you can see in the bottom left. So again, after a decade of hardship during the Depression, the fair really gave visitors hope and unveiled this kind of new era of progress and capitalism. And these things that the fair promised these people were attainable, right? Most of these people didn't have cars. They were lucky to own a house. The fair kind of gave this vision of a better standard of living, and this new optimism and hope that the Depression was winding down. Let's do that. Okay. So I have this very short video, which you can see kind of what the fair looked like on opening day, in the very last line of FDR's speech. And you can see the person behind him with a cane.
I hereby dedicate the World's
FDR,
Fair,
as I'm sure you all know,
the New York World's Fair,
was handicapped, and he would hold on to bars
and I
while he
declare
gave speeches and would gesture with his head.
to all mankind.
So because I wanted to bring this video in, since we're not in the park, I mean, even if we're in the park, it's completely different now, but to give you a sense of what it looked like back then. So the very opening day, they predicted 1 million visitors would come, but it was only about 400,000. And also to clarify, if you're new to World's Fair topic, when I say 39 to 40, it was 2 seasons. So the first season was April to October in 39, and then in 40, again, April to October. So two 6 months seasons. So this is a painting of the entire fair from the east with Manhattan in the background. Obviously, this is 1939. Airplanes and helicopters aren't a thing really yet. So to see the entire thing and kind of its proximity to the city, kind of need to imagine it through art. Or through a map. So this is flipped the other direction. To give you kind of sense of where we are, this is the Queen's Museum here. The US Open is over here, Met Stadium over here, and LaGuardia is over here. So the very center of the fair is the Trilon and Perisphere. Everything radiates out from it. You can see from these paths. So the trilon was 700 feet high, that's the triangle, and the perisphere is 180 feet in diameter. It was the largest globe made by man at the time. And to exit, so inside the globe is a exhibition we're going to talk about soon, but to exit the exhibition, you would leave via this helicline, which is a 950-foot ramp. So the trilon and perisphere were huge. This is a photograph from Midtown, and you can still see them from there. So it's this massive landmark. Just to note, the official colors of the World's Fair 39 were orange and blue. And the official motto was "Building the world of tomorrow with the tools of today," which is very prescient and appropriate given the historical context. In 1940, the motto became "For peace and freedom." So this is the construction of the trilon and perisphere. Made over about 1,000 sketches and model studies. And it was made out of 2,000 cubic yards of concrete and 4,000 tons of steel. A lot of this steel, fun fact, was recycled into weapons for the war later on. The sphere symbolized the world, right? It's a globe. And the tower represent an aspiration and looking to the future. Also, combined with the helicline, they represent three of geometry's most simple and fundamental forms: the sphere, the triangle, and the spiral. Inside the perisphere, like I mentioned, there's this massive exhibition, which we'll talk about in a second. But just to point out, so it's in the center of the fair, but it's also on the main axis of the US Federal Building, George Washington, which is little here and big here. It's really big, it was 60 feet tall. And then the New York City building, which becomes the Queen's Museum later, which is here. They would do special things with the perisphere. They would light it at night. It was this smooth white surface. So for Halloween, they projected a jack-o'-lantern. And again, also from looking at the Federal Building towards it, you get this nice view of GW being silhouetted by the perisphere and all the reflecting pools. So basically the trilon and perisphere, they practically were a landmark for the fair, but they also served as a symbol of the fair. Appeared on everything. It was a branding device. About 25,000 products were licensed for the fair, which earned them about 1 million in just their first season. This is definitely a new concept, this idea of merchandising. And this is what makes up the bulk of the Queen's Museum collection. Here's some other examples. But the trilon and perisphere showed up on everything: pins, light bulbs, salt and shaker paper, salt and pepper shakers, postage stamps. And these are just some things that we have in our collection that have the trilon and perisphere on them, which when we reopen, hopefully soon, you'll get to see them for yourself if you haven't already. So everything radiated out from the trilon and perisphere, which were called the theme center. And there was 7 zones that were roughly housed different exhibits within those themes. They are mostly self-explanatory, except for maybe the community interest zone, which many historians have described as kind of the leftovers in a way, like things that really didn't fit into any other zones. You also have a lot of the art exhibitions there. And more broadly, the exhibits in any of the sections are meant to promote something, whether that's a nation or a state, a new invention, a demonstration of a new product. There's also a lot of performances, a lot of spectacles. Really, it's about attracting people through your doors in order to sell them something that they can, then use to make their lives better. And that's the underlying theme without. So how progress is being made towards the future, towards the world of tomorrow. So because we can't talk about the entire fair, it's huge, I'm just going to be talking about a few select buildings from the theme center. We're going to return there, the government zone, transportation zone, and then the amusement area. Okay, so Democracity. And I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you guys probably know if I'm not, so let me know at the end. But it was housed in the perisphere. So this is a cutaway drawing. And basically, the admissions is here. You walk through, you go up through one of these escalators, which at the time were the longest escalators in the world. They were, one was 90 feet long, another was 120 feet long. So the longest escalators built ever. So they carry you to the perisphere. You watch a 6-minute show that cycles, and then you exit via the helicline, which takes you out around this way. So here's a view of the entrance. And then once you exit, you go to the observation platform and then down through the helicline. So inside the perisphere, it's twice the size of the interior of the Radio City Music Hall, which really, that's a huge place. So this kind of blows my mind that this is twice the size of that. And basically when you're inside, you stand on one of these two balconies that rotate in opposite directions. And below you is the city of the future. It's a suburbs from the year 2039, one of the largest models ever built. And basically they would cycle through the show 120 times a day, daily 8,000 visitors. It was a continuous show. And once you're rotating, there's a voiceover which talks about the city below. So this is the city below at nighttime. And then night emerges and they project images of workers marching towards the city on the curved surface of the inside of the perisphere. So as a theme center, Democracity is the fullest expression of the fair's ideology and its theme. So it represents the basic ideals of the world of tomorrow, but again, it's pretty attainable, pretty much predicted the future of suburbia in the US. So now we're gonna move across Grand Central Parkway from here to the transportation zone. So this was the most popular zone because of Futurama exhibit in the General Motors Pavilion. And this is a picture of the building, General Motors Pavilion. Attracted nearly 26 million visitors. It was by far the most popular attraction at the fair. There's always long lines to get in. They entered through this small cleft in the building. The building was designed by Albert Kahn. And their pavilion as a whole was huge. It was the 7-acre site. So here again is the lines to come in through the cleft. And then you follow the letters here. So D is the Futurama. So this is what everyone's waiting in line for. So we're gonna look at that in a second. Just wanted to show you really quickly, in our collection, we have a series of models made by a man, Frank Kroniken, who is a professional model maker. And he went to the fair as a kid and would go around the park after it had closed and collect pieces of it, and then would make models of the buildings. And this is the General Motors Models Pavilion. We have a number of them on display. So this is Futurama by General Motors. It was designed by Norman Bell Geddes, a really famous industrial designer at the time. And again, it's similar to Democracity. It's a narrated ride that showed the future of a fully employed and motorized America in the 60s through a series of scaled models. So now transportation like cars are taken for granted. Back then, trains were standard transportation between cities. Most international trips are by steamship. Superhighways didn't exist. So this was the world of the future. It showed the world, what the world would look like in 1960. And in some ways it got that right. We kind of became a country that's obsessed with cars. But generally, so this is a fun exhibit that people wanted to go to, but obviously it's from General Motors. They want to convince people that they can own cars, that they should own cars, and they should buy them. So they would sit in these moving chairs, and it took them past 408 dioramas representing the world of the 1960s. And the ride itself was an engineering marvel. Remember, there's no computers back then. Each of these chairs had their own speaker, and it had to sync up to the visual, to what people were moving past slowly. So there's a total of 552 sound chairs holding over 2,000 people, 28,000 people a day, and had to sync this all up without computers. I'm not going to go into the technical details, but it was an amazing feat. And the dioramas, they were designed to look as if you were in an airplane moving down slowly. So they'd gradually increase in scale until the very last line, the voiceover says, "All eyes to the future." And then at the end, you exit the ride, you get this button that says, "I have seen the future," and you walk out into kind of a real world reenactment of what the future will look like with these independent pedestrian walkways unimpeded by traffic below. So now we're going to move to the government zone. And this is basically where international pavilions, national pavilions are. We're going to talk about two structures briefly. We're going to talk about the Lagoon of Nations and Soviet Russia's pavilion. This is the Lagoon of Nations, Soviet Russia. So this area hosted buildings from 33 states and 58 countries. The Lagoon of Nations was a fountain. It was the biggest of the 20 fountains at the fair, and it was huge. So basically they created it by widening a section of the Flushing River and added a dam. It was 400 by 800 feet. You could fit all of Rockefeller Center in it. It's a big fountain. So the fountain side was impressive enough, but they wanted to have a nightly show every night that could sync up all these different elements. It was water, fire, lights, geysers. So they hired the best engineers, architects, and pyrotechnics to design a nighttime show. And it's a temporary structure. So that's one thing about World Fairs, is that most of these buildings and items aren't built to code. They're meant to be demolished after 2 years. So these people really went nuts. All synchronized to music. There was 1,000 water nozzles, 3,000 horsepower pumps, 3 million watts of electricity, 350 firework guns, and 400 gas jets. And to control all of this every night, 3 men would sit in front of these controls with a score to telling them which dials and things to press along to the music. And this doesn't do it justice, but neither do the photos. So I thought I would show you a few quick seconds of an old video of the Lagoon of Nations. I have no idea if this is the original music or if it's just the music that was on this YouTube video. It's still pretty dramatic. You can see how little the people are down here. Great. So it was like we were there. Okay. So now Soviet Russia's building, and it is often used as the highlight because it was the tallest building at the fair, the second in height only to the Trilon. It was also the most expensive. It cost $5 million to make. The man on top is obviously, sorry, this image is so blurry, I couldn't find a better one, but it is obviously a monument to the worker. People in New York would jokingly call him the Bronx strap hanger. A strap hanger, I had to look this up. It's a person who holds onto a rail, like the strap when they're on a bus or train. And either side of him were pictures of Lenin and Stalin looking at him. And I just wanted to show you, Frank also made a model of the Soviet Union, and sometimes he would collect fragments from videos, or fragments from the buildings, and he would kind of add them to the model. So this is a piece of pink stone that he had found that probably was on the facade that he added to his model. And we also have a figurine in our collection, which was obviously, you know, the biggest visual that people could see at the fair, or one of the biggest ones. So obviously they turned it into merchandise. How are we doing? Good, doing good time. All right, so now we're going to talk about the amusement area. So it's this huge area. It's about 280 acres. And it had the softest soil of the entire site. So they couldn't build huge buildings. So generally, there's a lot of very diverse things that were happening there, but it's where all the carnival rides were, kind of family area, and also the non-family area, kind of the seedier side of the fair, like nudie shows. So we're gonna be looking at 3 areas. So the parachute jump over here, or the parachute jump and the aquacade were 2 of the more popular shows in this area, attractions. And then we're also going to talk about Salvador Dali's Dream of Venus, which was not the most popular thing, but it's significant in terms of art history. And I think it was really cool and different. So we're going to talk about that too. So the parachute jump, basically it was based on a device that was used to train military personnel. It looks terrifying, but it was also the most popular ride in the area. 500,000 people did the plunge in the first season. It's 250 feet high. It cost 40 cents, which is pretty steep at the time. And I also read an anecdote where the people manning the admissions would tell them that when you get to the top, you had to pull a cord in order to release yourself to come down, but it actually didn't work. So people would always be surprised when they would fall down again. But I'm sure, as most of you know, that the parachute jump was moved to Coney Island and functioned until the 1960s. It doesn't function anymore as a ride, but it does kind of function as a symbol and has come to really define Coney Island and its skyline. So another really popular attraction was Billy Rose's Aquacade. The building itself was designed by Eymar Embury. So this was really popular. Estimated that 1 out of every 6 visitors came to the show. Basically, it was kind of a combination of performance and water ballet. This building, it was reused in the 64-65 World's Fair, and it was also used as a pool in the interim. Eventually, it was demolished in 1996. This was the show that was at the 64-65 World's Fair, World of Wonder, but the show wasn't as popular as Billy Rose's Aquacade and shut after the first season. These are a couple other random things in the amusement zone I thought I'd show you about, or show you. There was this Garden of Eden with 100 nude girls. There was also really crazy, horrifying things in retrospect, such as Morris Jess' Little Miracle Town, which was about 125 little people who would live in this town on display. There was also a woman frozen in ice that you could go look at, and also a bunch of babies in incubators. So really kind of crazy, wild stuff. And then Salvador Dali, Dream of Venus. So as I'm sure you know, Salvador Dali is a really famous surrealist artist, and this exhibit kind of helped solidify that fact. And he built this Dream of Venus. So dreams are really important to the surrealists because it's a way to tap into your subconscious. And there's Venus is all over the place. So this is Botticelli's Venus. And there's also the facade itself has a lot of organic protruding forms. It was a really marked contrast to the more streamlined, very restrained forms of most of the other buildings at the fair. There's these 2 legs, women's legs, that flank the ticket office, which is the sea monster. And this is a picture of Dali and his wife, Gala Dali, at the ticket office, and the facade at nighttime. And inside was really crazy. So it was basically you're walking through 4 of Venus's dreams, like a fun house, not a traditional exhibit. It was very immersive. And inside was this massive 30-foot tank that had swimming topless women in it. And surrounding them were a bunch of crazy things like giraffes, mannequin painted like a piano. And he covered all the women with sea creatures, like lobsters. He was really obsessed with lobsters. He'd also created this famous lobster phone in 1936, which is a symbol for him that could be associated with eroticism, pleasure, and pain. This is another scene of the Venus sleeping, dreaming. And then behind all these kind of staged live action performances were these backdrops that are very reminiscent of Salvador Dali's paintings. So overall, so I'm shifting gears to the Queen's Museum now, but just to kind of wrap up the World's Fair, in terms of money, the World's Fair was not very successful. It lost money. It didn't really bring too much business into Manhattan either. And it wasn't really successful in terms of attendance. So they projected 40 million people would come just the first year, but in 2 seasons, they only had 43 million people come, which is still a huge amount. That's the most that anyone has ever visited a World's Fair, but it kind of fell short of their prediction. So now we're switching gears to the Queen's Museum. This is what it looks like now if you haven't been there before. But it started as the New York City building, which you can see here. Because it's the host city, it's right next to the Trilon and Perisphere in the theme center. And this is a model of the city. So Eimer Embury, he's the guy that also designed the amphitheater. So the amphitheater and the New York City building were a few of the buildings that were constructed to stay after the fair. So I'm going to show you some construction photos. Here's the facade of the New York City building, very similar to how it looks today. And these are some construction photos to see the inside and the outside. You can see the Trilon is being built alongside of it. When it's constructed, was directed by Robert Moses, who's again the Parks Commissioner and later became one of the most powerful men in the city. And he was obsessed with recreation and parks. So he wanted to make a recreation facility. He almost designed the building with that in mind. That was a bigger priority than it as a pavilion for the New York City during the fair. I'm gonna show you a couple other views. There's Robert Moses. This is the building from the highway. And this is from the park. You can see people walking on the helicline and it in the background. So inside, it was dedicated to New York City. And there was plenty of exhibitions. This is a floor plan of the exhibitions during the fair's run. And they're basically meant to show what the city could do and promote all of its government agencies, basically. There's not that many photos of the inside. These are 2 that I've been able to find. They show what the police and fire departments used to do. So the police staged a murder at midnight drama multiple times throughout the day. Kind of, they would have someone murdered and the police would come up and do forensics and fingerprinting and they'd solve it really quickly. The fire department did demonstrations of rescues. These are a couple other displays. Sorry, this photo isn't great, but it's, I added it because Robert Moses, obviously he wants to show off his parks department. So when the fair ended, like I'd mentioned, it hadn't made a profit. This is actually a clipping of an article Moses wrote before the fair started of all the plans that he wanted to do in the park. But the park, he didn't get the money that was promised, the $2 million, because there wasn't a profit. So basically, he was able to convert the New York City building into a pretty rudimentary recreation area, but the rest of the park kind of languished until the next fair in '64. The building itself became an ice skating rink on the south end and a roller rink on the north end with a running track around it until about 1946. In 1946, the UN General Assembly needed a place to convene while their building in Midtown was being built. And so they ended up using the New York City building. It was in a fairly good location. And the UN was hosted the New York City building from 46 to 50. There's lots of renovations and additions added to the building. They covered the rinks. The model on the right was a proposal to try to make it into a permanent home, which obviously didn't happen. They added an annex with an exhibition hall, cafeteria, and dining room. This stamp commemorates their time there. And generally, these are some important events that happened while the UN was in the New York City building. So this is Harry Truman in the opening, dedicating the space. UNICEF was created here in 1946. The State of Israel was formed in 1948. But also during this time is when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was passed. So in the 1950s, it became a recreation center again. I found this home video from 1957 on YouTube, give you an idea what the space was like then, which as someone who works at the Queen's Museum, it kind of blows my mind. And then the next big change in the building was the '64 World's Fair. So this is a map of the World's Fair, and you can see it's all different, but they kept the radiating layout the same. And here again is the New York City building. And it was right next to the Unisphere. So this replaced the Trilon and Perisphere. So the building was renovated and they added a scalloped entry awning to the entryways. And the north side of the building became exhibition halls. The south side stayed an ice skating rink. And the most famous exhibit that's still there is the panorama of the city of New York. And basically this was built by Moses to commemorate all the projects that he had done to the city. It was the size of 2 basketball courts. It was huge and includes every single building of all 5 boroughs. It was incredibly meticulous. And during the fair, people paid 10 cents to ride helicopters around the model of New York City, listening to a voiceover. And this is also, I'm going to put this in the chat later, but in the audio tour that I wrote, you can listen to the original audio that they listened to in the helicopter cars, and also gives you a lot more detail about the panorama in general. They also had exhibits for the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. This is actually the very recent Verrazano Bridge was set to open in 1964, just as the fair was opening, and this is one of the cables on display for the bridge. Again, the south side was still an ice skating rink. Here's the panorama. Here's the Triborough Authority exhibits. And the ice skating rink was used for only a few weeks for Dick Button's ice extravaganza, which didn't do really well. So it closed, and then that part of the building remained vacant for the rest of the fair. So this is after the World's Fair, wrapping up. There's a few other buildings that remained, but again, it was everything was demolished, or the majority of the buildings were demolished after the fair. And in 1972, the north side of the building became the Queen's Center for Art and Culture, which later was called the Queen's Museum of Art. And we became the steward of the panorama. And there's also the ice skating rink still on the south side. There's another building at the entrance facing the other image of the building facing the parking lot. And an image of the lobby. So the panorama, there was a huge renovation in 1994 where they took out the helicopter cars, they were rusting, and took the panorama upstate to be updated. That was kind of the purpose of the panorama, to be updated as the city changed. The last major update was during this time. There hasn't been a major overhaul since. It's another image, the panorama gone. But this is a more recent photo, but gives you a sense of the changes. So there's no more helicopters. You can go on this ramp where the helicopter used to be and be in the open air of the space and kind of take your time with it. The ice skating rink on the south side of the building remained open until 2008, where it was closed to get ready for our next big renovation, which was finished in 2013, and is what the museum looks like today. And it changed, it created 2 more entrances, and just became the Queens Museum. Got rid of art because we don't just show art, we show New York City history, we show a range of exhibits that deal with community, cultural artifacts and events. So it's a very diverse range of programs and exhibitions, and that's what they wanted to capture. And it still houses the panorama, just here. This is some images of the inside if you haven't been there. The renovation doubled our exhibition space. So now that we have lots of breathing room for contemporary art exhibitions or exhibitions about history. And here's a recent recent image of the panorama on a school tour. Thousands of school kids come and see the panorama every year. And that's it. I'm only 5 minutes over. But I think right now we wanted to see if there is any questions.
Amy, maybe I can give you a few minutes to look through our chats, and I can share our website because we have a lot of information about 1939 World Fair, and I can share it with people while you're looking at chat. Is it okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so let me share my screen, and I can. Okay, can everyone see that our summer reading, we came here to shine? Yes? Okay. Can you see it, Amy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So here is our summer reading ambassador, Susie Orman-Schnall. And this is her book, We Came Here to Shine. And because it's based on 1939 World Fair, she did fantastic research. Did you know that Fair had its own newspaper? So this is a short video where...
Hi, my name is Susie Orman-Schnall, and I have been a purchase resident for the last 19 years with my husband and our 3 teenage sons. I'm so excited that the Harrison Public Library has chosen my new novel, We Came Here to Shine, as a spotlight pick for the summer reading program. We Came Here to Shine is uplifting historical fiction about 2 bold women and the summer they spent working at the 1939 New York World's Fair, one as a journalist and one as a synchronized swimmer in Billy Rose's Aquafade.
So this is Susie's presentation about her book, but what's very interesting, her memorabilia video. So like I said, she did research and she collected a lot of things from 1964 and 1939 World's Fair. I just give you a peek so you can see what's there. You can watch it later. I just wanted to share this information with you so you can go back to our website, harrisonpl.org, and watch it on your spare time. So, Amy, did you look through?
Yeah, there's really great questions.
Yeah, a lot of wonderful questions. So right now you can unmute yourself and ask questions, and Amy can answer.
The moving sidewalks. And then, okay, so sorry if there was a misunderstanding. I was going to talk about the 64 fair today. I have given talks recently on the 64, 65 fair. If you note, oh my goodness, even just 45 minutes talking about the 39 World's Fair and the Queen's Museum was really tight. So talking about everything would have been a challenge, but it would have been really interesting, especially to compare between the two. And I'm sorry you didn't get what you were expecting. What did you do with the helicopter cars? So as far as I know, most of the helicopter cars were thrown away. We do have one at the Queen's Museum in our collection that's in storage behind the museum. I am not exactly sure what happened to the rocket thrower statue. I know it's impossible to kind of follow all the threads of things from the fairs where they end up. A lot of things get recycled.
The rocket thrower is there. The rocket thrower is in the park, and it's been restored.
Oh, yeah, I'm thinking of a different. Oh, right, yeah, sorry. That's the sculpture right behind the Unisphere. It's still there. That's from the 64 World's Fair, not the 39 World's Fair.
Right.
Thank you for that. What else? Was there anything inside the Trilon other than just the admissions desk and the escalators? I think that might be it, unless someone knows something that I don't. And the funding for the Dali, I know that, so Ian Woodner was the architect that kind of came up with the idea and built the structure. I know that he talked to Billy Rose, who's also the Aquacade. They wanted to originally do a mermaid show of women and kind of invited Dali, and he kind of had to take on this idea and his plan for the pavilion, but I'm not exactly sure who paid for it, if anyone else knows.
It was a question about, was it 2 seasons fair officially sanctioned? And is the Unifair larger than Paris Fair?
Ooh. So the fair did have the borough, the BIE's approval for the first year, but we've never actually been, we've never actually been a member. So it wasn't officially sanctioned, but it was kind of had its blessing. And they also only had their blessing for the first year. They kind of, what happened to Salvador Dali's? I actually don't know what happened to Salvador Dali's exhibit. If anyone knows, that would be really interesting. So America and the Soviet Russia did not have a good relationship during this time. Soviet Russia actually didn't come back for the second season of the fair.
What was the thinking about the United States Pavilion at the 64-65 fair? Did they think about another use for it, because it stayed up for several years after the fair closed?
Right, I do know that it was demolished after they couldn't figure out something to do with it. I'm not exactly sure the politics behind it. My guess is that Robert Moses wanted it gone. Will they rebuild the Trilon and Perisphere? I think probably not, because the Unisphere has become such an iconic, I mean, in some ways it has been rebuilt into all those products, right? I think also when you start to think the scale of some of these, you know, world fairs don't really happen as much anymore. We're a smaller world now. We have the internet. We don't, those types of projects take up a lot of money. They know that world fairs aren't very profitable. So I don't think they're going to rebuild the Trilon and Perisphere. Anyway,
hey, Amy. I had a quick question. How are you doing? Good?
Yeah.
Hey, good to see you. The rings around the Unisphere, I heard that they represent 3 satellites that were going around the Earth at the time. Do you happen to know anything more about that?
That's what I had read, that it represents the first 3 satellites that had gone into space.
Okay.
Did you hear something else?
No, I was just wondering which one, but if you're saying that it's the first three, then that's a great answer. Sure.
I thought it represented the first orbit of the Earth by one of the missions.
Astronauts.
Yeah, by the astronauts. That's what I think. That's what I think it represented.
John Glenn or Alan B. Shepard.
That's right. It was a John Glenn. It was the first.
Alan B. Shepard. Yeah.
Yep.
I did read one or two places where there are alternate interpretations like that, but most sources say the three first satellites. I'm gonna go with that.
Do the lights still work on the Unisphere? They marked certain locations.
No, not that. I don't think so. I know that it used to have lights. Anyone have questions about the 39 World's Fair? That's what I prepared for, guys.
Well,
I enjoyed it quite a
Emmy,
lot.
we would like to invite you back to talk specifically about 1964.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm not an expert on these fairs by any means. I've been at, the Queen's Museum for 2 years now, and I've read a lot about them. And it sounds you guys have so much knowledge, and I wish I had known my audience was going to be experts. I would have tailored this a little differently. So maybe next time I'll get into the crazy 64 details.
Yeah, all learning. It's fascinating.
DY Doctor, great show. Is there any particular items that are on your wish list to display at the museum? Ooh, so one of apparently in our collection, we have the phone that JFK dialed to launch the 1964 World's Fair. He dialed 1964 and it called the fair and it started this countdown clock, and it was just like a gimmick. But it's in our collection, or at least that's what I've read, and that would be great, I think, to put on display.
I want quickly to share this information. It's Untapped New York, a company that does walking tours in New York City. And actually they do tour in the remains of World Fair, but they also recorded virtual tours. So this is what we participated like a month ago. It's very good. You need to be an insider, and you can log in and subscribe for 2 months for free. So you will be able to log in, stay at home code, and it will be 2 months free, and you can unsubscribe, but you can watch this fantastic information, and it's like almost 2 hours nonstop. So many facts, so many information. You will love it. And it's not only about World's Fair, it's also about fantastic landmarks in New York City. I'm sure you will love it.
And I've heard they started doing their walking tours again.
Yes, they do. And I actually shared the link, and it costs $35, so you can participate. But if you prefer virtual tour, and if you are not in New York City, that it could be free. You just log in with a code, and for 2 months, travel in New York.
And also, if anyone's interested about the panorama, I put the link to the audio tour in the chat.
Well, if somebody wants to share any information, it seems like we have people from Facebook and people who are doing research and writing movie scripts. So if you know something that you would love to share with everyone, please do. Anyone?
A good place to find archival photos of the 3964 Fair is the Queen's Library. They have a great collection of World's Fair memorabilia. They catalog Queen's Museum collection as well as MCNY and NYPL. I mean, they have everything. Yes, yeah. The library people would know that. I don't know why I'm answering.
Oh.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I can't believe how many people came up. World's Fair is good stuff. And hopefully we can do another one on the 64 World's Fair.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to mention that we're recording this session, so it will be posted on our YouTube channel on harrisonpl.org website. And we definitely will invite Dr. Raffel again to talk specifically about 1964 World's Fair. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Enjoy your night, everyone.
Bye-bye.